Good evening, good evening, good evening. My name is Paul Holdengräber. I'm the Director of Public Programs here at the New York Public Library, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to the opening night of Live from the New York Public Library's 2017 fall season, a season which includes Atul Gawande and Elizabeth Alexander tomorrow, Nicole Krauss, Frederick Wiseman, and Errol Morris next week, Olafur Eliasson and Muhammad Yunus the following week, and shortly thereafter, Stephen Greenblatt will be joined by Tony Kushner. And there's much more in store to hopefully delight and inspire you this fall, as you can see from the program you all have received. I am thrilled to be welcoming Salman Rushdie back to Live from the New York Public Library. It is always a great pleasure to talk to him on any stage. We have shared many on various continents over the years. Tonight we celebrate the publication of The Golden House, Salman Rushdie's newest novel, just out, which he will happily sign after our conversation. As always, my gratitude for the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispani Bartos, and Adam Bartos. For their support of Live from the New York Public Library, I dearly thank them. Now, all of you know that for the last 7, 8, 9 years, I've been asking my guests for a biography of themselves in 7 words that might or might not define them. A haiku of sorts, or if you're modern, a tweet. And we'll hear that Salman Rushdie no longer tweets. It'll be interesting to ask him why. Probably some form of wisdom there. But here are his 7 words. Midnight, verses, Haroon, ground, enchantress, Anton, Manhattan. Please warmly welcome to this stage Salman Rushdie.
All right.
It's really wonderful to have you back.
I know, we keep doing this.
We do this gig, it follows us and we follow it. Now, before we even talk, I'd like us to look.
Okay.
I'd like us to look at a little clip. As you know, I love those.
Yeah.
And then talk.
All righty.
And I think the clip sets up what we might talk about fairly well, I hope. So let's do it.
When you wake up in the morning, do you feel tired and run down? Do you have that listless feeling?
Yeah.
Why might I have shown this?
Well, Rear Window. The real house, which allegedly inspired Hitchcock, I mean, I think that's probably a sound stage, that's probably a set. But the real house was on Christopher Street and had this rear window which looked out on other people's backyards and other people's windows. I mean, it's not unusual in Manhattan to look out your back window and look across the yard and see other people's windows. But about 100 yards away from that house, there is this secret garden in the village, which is between McDougal and Sullivan Streets on the west and east, and between Bleecker and Houston to the north and south. In that little rectangle, there's what's called the McDougal-Sullivan Historic Gardens District, which is a little place where only the houses whose yards give out onto this communal garden can have access to it. So it has a kind of rear window quality, because it's whichever house you're in, you can kind of see what's going on in all the other. There's about a dozen houses on each side, and I have, I know a couple of people who live there, so I've been going there for a long time and doing things like playing ping pong.
I recall.
You and I have a ping pong history, which
we will leave aside.
We will leave
now.
to one side.
And this is a form of ping pong in a way too.
I just point out that Paul is very competitive.
Salman isn't at all.
Anyway, at a certain point when I was thinking about this book and where to set it and all that, I suddenly thought about these gardens because they began to seem to me like a theater, in a way not unlike what Hitchcock thinks uses the little world of Rear Window. A theater in which the actors, the characters, can come out on this little lawn and enact their story. So it felt almost like, I mean, the book has some echoes of Greek tragedy, I think, and it felt a bit like that. It felt like an amphitheater, with everybody looking at each other's lives. So that's where that was. I mean, for me, with my writing, I've always found that place is very important. That until I have an exact sense of where a story is going to be set, the wheels don't turn. So finding or having the idea of setting it in that garden with that sort of rear window feeling was one of the keys to the book. And a mixture of private and public. Yeah, because you've got this little private world of these gardens, but around that, is Greenwich Village, and around that is New York, and around that is America. And so I wanted to have that sense of a private story, the story of these characters, the little personal tragedy, tragic comedy maybe, but the personal tragic comedy of this family, which we'll no doubt discuss, physically separated from, but surrounded by, the kind of larger tragicomedy of America.
And as you were talking, I was remembering that fabulous cartoon of Steinberg, New York and then America. America is
just this small bit,
a tiny little bit,
small
Los Angeles
bit to
at the very
west
end.
of New York.
Well, let's look quickly at image 1 and 2, just to give us a sense of what inspired Salman Rushdie. It's an old picture. And this one is more recognizable.
Yeah,
the second one.
Yeah, well, there it is. Anna Wintour lives there.
Pardon?
Anna Wintour lives there. The editor of Vogue.
Now we know. But I think it goes beyond just that extraordinary secret garden setting. It also speaks in some way to your passion for film. And I mean, you are, as the French would say, a real cinéphile. Well,
first of all, if you are born and raised in Bombay as I was, Bombay is a movie city first and everything else second. And so if you grow up there, you have the movies in your blood. There's just no way not to be obsessed by cinema. And then when I went to England, and particularly when I was at university, I mean, I think I spent probably at least as much time in the movie theater as in the library.
Maybe more.
Maybe more. And I would do the 1960s equivalent of binge watching, you know, which is, I remember when they were showing, there was this little art house theatre in Cambridge, middle of Cambridge, called the Arts Cinema. And I remember they showed Alain René's film L'année dernière à Marienbad, last year at Marienbad, which is a very difficult film to understand. And I went to see it 3 times in consecutive performances. And then there's a strange little matchstick game in last year at Marienbad, with 16 matches arranged, 1, 3, 5, 7, and you have to try and make the other person pick up the last match.
You've done that game.
And I went to see the film again with a friend of mine who was a mathematician. I said, we have to crack this game. You know, and we did. And so now there's a moment in the film where the bad guy says to the sort of, not really a hero, but the sort of anti-hero figure, challenges him to play. And as they sit down, he says, you won't win, peut pas gagner. And the hero says, it's not a game if you can't lose. And the bad guy says, oh, I can lose, but I never do. Je peux perdre, mais je perds jamais.
Jamais.
And now I'm able to say that.
I must say I haven't cracked it at all. I mean, I've tried. But I think in a way what that makes me think about is the notion of watching and rewatching.
Yeah.
Because we talk a lot about rereading books. And it might be interesting to talk to you a little bit more about the notion of watching and rewatching. Yeah. And if, since film is so important in this new book, did you, while you were working on the book, watch and rewatch
I did do
films?
some stuff, yeah. I mean, the thing is, I've been a film freak forever, you know, since those early days in Bombay and then those days in Cambridge. And I'm sort of involved with, you know, I'm on one of the people on the advisory board of the Telluride Film Festival, etc. You know, so I'm kind of, I love movies, and I'm not purist about movies. You know what I mean? There are people who only like 7-hour films in Hungarian. And I'm not one of those people. I mean, for example, I really like Wonder Woman. You know, I thought it was a good movie. You know, and so I could go from Wonder Woman to Werner Herzog without a problem. But I've never really, I mean, Midnight's Children has bits of movie stuff in it, but I've never really used it as almost as a technical thing in a book. And in this novel, what happened was that the character of this young man, René, who lives in these gardens, I imagine him as being just out of NYU Film School and wanting to begin to be a filmmaker. And he becomes obsessed with this family, the Golden family, which is what the book's about. But it just allowed me, through him, to use a lot of this film nonsense that's been in my head all my life. You know?
So in a way, it was therapeutic.
Yeah, well, it was fun. And I did do some rewatching. I mean, I watched some of Jules Jim again, you know.
Does it live up?
It really does. Really does.
Because I feel so often now that I watch
the films don't live up.
Yeah, but really, and my memory of them is so different.
But some of them do. See?
Yeah.
Pierrot le Fou, Godard film, completely still brilliant. Visconti's The Leopard, completely one of the greatest films ever made. And some of them don't. You know, some Godard doesn't actually live up, but to re-scrutiny.
I was happy to see The Bicycle Thief again, and it lives up.
Yes, wonderful
It lives up. I mean, I can't see the credits in the beginning without falling apart.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I mean, I was very lucky years ago that in London, I was invited to a lunch at the French embassy in honor of Jean Moreau, whose 70th birthday it was.
Oui,
and I got
sadly.
to sit next to Jean Moreau,
God, let
who
me
was,
touch you.
you know,
Yeah.
who was this wonderful storyteller. They were sitting at the same. It's not relevant, but it's fun to. At this table there was a sort of apparatchik of the French embassy, whose job it was to lob softball questions at her. You know, so who would say things like, "Now you must tell how you met our famous French film director, François Truffaut." and she said, she had this deep gravel voice, and she said, it was at Cannes. We were, in the Palais du Cinéma. And I am there with Louis. And one of her conversations, you had to fill in the surnames.
Yeah.
So
Louis Malle.
So Louis is Louis Malle, right? So I'm there with Louis for his film, you understand. And then at a certain moment, François, he come with another person. And for some time, François is working with Louis, and I am behind with another person. And then, after a moment, il y a un changement, and then suddenly I am working with François. And it's very strange, she said to me, because he would not see me in the face. He would look always down. And then sometimes he would look up, and then he would quickly look down. And then after a while, he looked me in the face, and he say me, "Can I have your telephone number?" And the little apparatchik across the table said, "And you gave it to him." Anyway, so Jean Moreau. Jean Moreau, R.I.P.
And Jean Moreau. But another film that does live up is Louis Malle's Elevator to the Gallows.
Yes, yes.
Which is just fantastic.
Wonderful. I mean, there's a lot of Louis Malle that lasts. Anyway, so I just suddenly had a filmmaker character
who took over.
Yeah, because also with René, he was supposed to be a marginal character, and he sort of became central. Because initially, there's this crazy family, right? There's this sort of corrupt old patriarch, 70-year-old man, Nero Golden, who's relocated from Bombay to New York and has changed his name and is going to great lengths to conceal his history, and he has his 3 differently crazy sons. And I thought this book's about them. And that René, the filmmaker, is going to be like our surrogate. He's going to be like the I am a camera point of view person. And as he finds out their secrets, so also we will find out their secrets. That was sort of the plan. But he didn't want to go along with the plan. and there's a point
and
where
he sort of told you, "I'm not going to go along with the plan."
Yeah, there's a point where there's a borderline between the observer and the participant, and there was a moment when it became clear that he was not going to stay on his side of the line, that he was going to go into their story and become a very important part of their story.
That must be quite infuriating for a novelist, that the characters sort of get away.
I used to think that, but now I'm kind of grateful for it. I want them to tell me what to do, because I don't know. I mean, if the character is so energetic and alive that they can guide you, then I mean that's a gift. And I loved it that René got into the story, and the novel, in a way, instead of just being a novel about this family, became a novel about him. And it became, in a strange way, became a Bildungsroman. It became a novel about the getting of wisdom, about a young man growing up, making mistakes, having to learn from his mistakes, and having to find out how to be a man.
It's funny because I was thinking as I was reading the novel of Buddenbrooks.
Well, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Shorter than Buddenbrooks.
But apart from that, a lot in common.
But apart from that, yeah, I mean, shorter than the brothers Karamazov, but has what I mean, I got brothers
shorter
too.
than La Recherche. Yeah.
Yes,
so.
I got brothers too.
Yeah.
But they're different brothers. Shorter is good.
This has nothing to do with anything, but you know the story of Groucho Marx and Casablanca. when the Warner Brothers gets very upset and writes to Warner, writes to Groucho Marx. It's because you mentioned brothers and says, you know, you can't do a movie called Casablanca. And he says, but why? And he says, but you know,
we made a movie called Casablanca.
We made a movie.
And then he writes to them and says, but we were brothers before you were brothers.
Yeah.
Where do you get off calling yourself the Warner Brothers when we were the Marx Brothers first?
Before, yes. Fantastic, no?
Yeah, they shut up. They shut up after that.
Two more quick movie moments. The book begins with an epigraph of Truffaut, which I'd like you to unravel a little bit. La vie a beaucoup plus d'imagination que nous. And you leave it in French.
Life has much more imagination than we do. It's just, you know, I mean, another way of saying that is truth is stranger than fiction.
Right.
You know, and I do think we live in that moment, don't we?
What might you be referring to?
I'm just in general.
Yes.
We just do seem to live in a moment in which you can't make it up. Every day there's something you would never dream of making up. And if you did make it up, people would tell you was completely unconvincing.
Yeah.
And so we live in unconvincing times. I mean, reality has become unconvincing because it's so bizarre. And every day, just when you think, no, it can't get worse than this,
it can.
It gets worse than that. Every time you think there's nowhere lower to go because we're like on the floor already, he finds a basement.
But in a way, the Golden House is prescient that way.
You know, the weird thing is
because you wrote it you wrote it 2 years before.
Well, it was finished. It was essentially finished before November the 8th. I mean, I did do a little tinkering after that. And the really strange thing is that the book knew something that I didn't know.
Like,
you know, I was thinking it's going to be fine. It's going to be all right. You know, I mean, even on election day, when I went to cast my vote, I came out thinking, this is exciting. It's going to be a great night. You know, and my book, on the other hand, had a different opinion. You know, my book had worked out that something else was going to happen, and that there was going to be this tragic movement from the optimism of 8 years earlier to its opposite. You know, and that arc was already, I mean, that's what I was writing. And it's very strange that the book understood it and I didn't. You know, and I think that happens, you know, that the work you're making can be wiser than you are.
And that the characters, as you were saying earlier, know something.
They can know things that you don't know, you know. And in a way, you're grateful for them to come up with, you know, to know things, that you have thoughts that you've never had yourself, you know, to say things that you've never imagined saying. You know, this is what the weird thing about the creative act.
And do you think that has some, in what you're saying, one can maybe find the true wisdom of what a novel can do?
Well, I mean, the novel can do a lot, but that's one of the things it can do. I think right now, what the novel can do, paradoxically, is to remind us that there is such a thing as the truth. You know, and there is such a thing as the opposite of the truth. There are lies. And it actually changed my, you know, this book is, the novel before this was also a New York novel, but it was a fairy tale. You know, it had genies and flying carpets and shit. and I really thought, stop it. You know, I
Snap out of it.
I thought we're living in a moment when everything is a lie. You know, everything, all around us, there are people making things up. You know, and I thought maybe it's time for novels to tell the truth. You know, to do the opposite of what's happening. And so it really did push my writing. It has pushed my writing in a new direction for me.
I'm sure this is a question you're going to get many, many times, but names are so important.
Yeah.
And
I love names.
And I read recently that one of the books you were rereading constantly is Saul Bellow's Humbled's
Well,
Gift.
Saul Bellow is a genius namer.
Yeah.
You know, you have a gangster called Rinaldo Cantabile. And, you know, just von Humboldt Fleischer, you know, as a name for Delmore Schwartz. You know, it's wonderful. Charlie Citrine. He's like an orange. But, I mean, there's all through.
You had fun with these names.
Yeah, but you see, one of the things, again, it's a thing of coming from the East, because in places like India and Pakistan, when you're naming a child, you think about the meaning of the name. You know, you're not just thinking, oh, that's a nice name, or that's a name in my family, or whatever. You're thinking, what does this name mean? And what am I saying about this child by giving it this name? You know, so you think about names in that way, very much more deeply in a way than people in the West. And so I've used the same. I think about the names of characters like that. You know, sort of naming them as if they were babies. Nero, well, he names himself. And, you know...
Well, you must have had a hand in that.
I did have, yeah. I was involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, years ago I was in Rome, or as we now say in America, Rome, Italy.
Just in case.
Yeah, just in case. You know, Ithaca is not just in New York. Cambridge is not only, you know, in America. Yeah. There's real Cambridge, which is where I went. But anyway, I was taken by my publisher and to see this, what was then just beginning to be excavated, because you know, Nero, the Emperor Nero, built this colossal palace, which he called the Golden House, which he called the Domus Aurea, and which his successor was so disgusted by the excess of this palace that he buried it. He literally put huge amounts of earth on top, buried it under a hill, and it remained buried until relatively recently. I mean, where they've now begun to sort of excavate it. And I got taken into it, you know, this what was now this underground palace. And it's an unbelievably powerful place. And so I remembered Nero and the Golden House, you know, from that visit. And then I thought that I would have my own Nero and my own Golden House. Yes, it came from that.
But names are terribly important for your characters and also your name.
My name?
Yes.
Salman.
Yes,
Peaceful.
but Ibn.
Peaceful.
Yeah.
No, the Ibn Rushd, that's the other bit, but Salman, peaceful. You know, typecasting. No, Rushdie was a name that my father made up because he was an admirer of the philosopher Averroes, Ibn Rushd. And so Rushdie of Rushd. And yeah, so that became my name. And I mean, he's an interesting figure, Averroes, because he's a very progressive voice, you know, back then in the 12th century, and was also persecuted and so on. You know.
And Dionysus. I mean, you have a character called Dionysus.
Yes. Now, Dionysus is interesting because in the novel, all the other members of the family take Roman names. But this, the kind of bastard son, takes a Greek name, and just to be difficult. But also because, you know, there's a lot of legends about Dionysus going to India. A lot of the myth of Dionysus involves him going to India. There's even some people think that this place called Mount Nisau, which is where Dionysus was originally apparently born, might have been in India. So he's a god with a lot of Indian associations. And of course, in his Roman incarnation, he becomes Bacchus, and so he becomes a drunk. He becomes the god of booze and pleasure. Anyway, so yes, this character. But the other thing that's important about Dionysus is that he's often represented as not just bisexual, but bigendered. He's sometimes portrayed as being
of two,
so almost hermaphroditic. You know, and since that character in the novel is one of the youngest son of Nero, who is deeply conflicted about his gender identity, you know, it seemed like an appropriate name for him.
We don't want to give too much away, but
No,
I
we
want
can
to
give
read.
that away.
I want to read. I want to read this passage, which I very much like.
Yeah, you read it.
The Okay, I'll do my best. The Golden thought they would wipe the slate clean, take on new identities, cross the world and be other than what they were. They would escape from the historical into the personal, and in the new world, the personal would be all they sought and all they expected. It did not occur to any of them that their decision was born of a colossal sense of entitlement, this notion that you could just step away from yesterday and start tomorrow as if it wasn't a part of the same week, to move beyond memory and roots and language and race into the land of the self-made self, which is another way of saying America.
Yeah. Well, of course it doesn't work.
Because you can't. You
Well,
bring, as
you know,
Seneca said, you bring yourself when you
the
travel.
the problem with
It's
leaving
you.
the problem with leaving home is you bring yourself along.
Yeah.
But you know, the truth is, I think, in a novel, it's impossible to escape your past. In a novel, if this group of people, this father and 3 sons, arrive in Greenwich Village, and it's pretty damn clear to the reader very soon
A lot of foreshadow.
that they're concealing something pretty colossal and dark.
A secret that is
Yeah,
quite...
there's a big whatnot in the closet.
And secrets secrete.
Something
Yeah.
nasty in the woodshed. You know that that's going to come out. I mean, how could you write a novel in which you never tell people? Well, yes, that, you know. So in a novel, if you're trying to do that, it's bound to fail because the writer is going to fuck you up. You know, he's going to make it happen. The thing that you're hiding is going to blow up in your face. In real life, I think people actually do manage it. You know, I think people do manage to come to America from everywhere in the world and make perfectly nice lives here which leave their past behind. I think they do. And so I think, you know, this is one of the many ways in which real life is superior to fiction. That you actually can do
The
things.
Truffaut line again.
Yeah, you can do things in real life which novels won't let you do.
You can come here, leave the past.
Yeah. And nobody cares. Nobody who cares, you know. No, this is a country without a memory. Nobody remembers what happened yesterday. So you can be anybody you like because nobody remembers who you were before. You know, it's like this is like the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. This is like no room, move along.
I'm always struck by that in particularly the way English is spoken in America, that when you want to say that something's completely irrelevant, you say that's history.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And they have songs about it. They have songs about it, don't know much about history.
Yeah.
And it's said like it's a good thing.
But the burden of the past.
Yeah,
and the burden of the past, in a way, is squarely on the characters of the novel.
You know, Nero has, I can't give it away.
No,
but
I'm
Nero
being careful myself.
Nero had, well, let me tell you a little bit about the backstory, the origin of the backstory, which is in India, which eventually in the novel you find out, but not immediately. There's this strange nexus in Bombay, which is on the one hand, some parts of the super rich of Bombay are interpenetrated by the criminal mafias. So, and one of the most obvious places where you can see this is in Bollywood, because an enormous amount of, not all the films made in Bombay, but a serious percentage of the films made in Bombay have a lot of mafia money in them. You know, so the crime syndicates and the rich, you know, they go to the same parties. And so that's one thing. The other thing that happened in recent decades is that there also became a linkage between the crime syndicates in Bombay and the jihadist terrorists based in Pakistan. And when there was the attack on the Taj Hotel, etc., which is one of the motivating things in the novel, it was because of a collusion between the Bombay crime syndicates and the Pakistani jihadists who jointly planned it. Anyway, so I thought, A, this is very interesting, and B, I haven't seen it that much written about. And so I thought if I could put a character in the middle of that, you know, that would be interesting. So I mean, that was really the birth of Nero Golden, that he was this wealthy capitalist in Bombay who became sucked into that world of the criminal syndicates. The mafia company in the novel is called Z Company. It's named after its leader has a name that begins with the letter Z. But the actual mafia in Bombay is the biggest mafia family, as one would say, is called D Company. D Company because its leader is a man called Dawood Ibrahim, who is now like public enemy #1, and he's sort of in hiding in Pakistan, except the Pakistanis pretend they've never heard of him. But he runs the mafia from there. Anyway, it's not unlike America in that, you know how, I mean, there's no shortage of movies about the mafia in America. There's also no shortage about the movies about the mafia in India. So there are endless. There's a movie called Company, which is about the mafia. There's 2 films which begin with the title Shootout at.
Did you watch some of
them
them
of course,
while writing this?
Yeah. Some of them made by friends of mine and so on. But I mean, so there's the mafia is the second most interesting thing in Bombay after the film industry. and as I say, sometimes it's the same thing. So that's where it started. This man who gets sucked into the darkness of crime and who then wants to get away from it. You know, he's afraid for his children because there's threats of reprisals. You know, when he wants to leave the syndicates, they say, well, you know, you've got children, haven't you? And so he's afraid for them. And here, I thought that the tragedy of Nero Golden is that he gets drawn into that criminal world, and then he wants out. But
Too late.
But he can't get out.
Yeah.
One of the mafia hoods actually quotes to him the Eagles, quotes to him Hotel California. It says, you can check out, but you can never leave. And, the Eagles got to Bombay. And so he tries this colossal project of remaking his life halfway across the world to try and get out of the jam he's been in order to protect his family. And then it comes after him. You know, so that's
Should we briefly mention something that I found very interesting, which is, and I want to see it built, the Museum of Identity.
Yeah, I love the Museum of I made up this thing called the Museum of Identity.
Little do we know it will open.
No, it'll be there next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's there already.
I was really surprised that it didn't exist. A lot of journalists who've been interviewing me in the last few weeks have said that they had to Google it to check whether it existed or not, because they thought it must, you know, because the interest in identity is so great. So yeah, there's this Museum of Identity, and it's on the Bowery, you know, of course.
Yeah.
and it's kind of, you know, where the new museum is?
Yeah, I was thinking, just nearby. There used to be a little opera house.
Yes,
maybe they can occupy that.
It's sort of there.
Yeah.
And it's a museum, and one of the characters in the novel, the woman who falls in love with the younger son, Dionysus, the one who's sexually complicated. She works there as a curator, and in a way, and the Museum of Identity is full of artifacts which illustrate the issue of identity down the ages and across the cultures. It has artifacts from Native American tribes which have recognized multiple genders for a long time, and it has like a statue of there's one of the Hindu gods is a deity called Ardhanarishvara, which is a half man, half woman god, and so on. And how the Egyptian when people like Queen Hatshepsut in Egypt was sitting on the throne as the pharaoh, she had to wear a beard because pharaohs wore beards. So even if you're a woman, you had to wear a beard. Anyway, so it's a museum about identity, yeah. And I thought somebody's going to open this any second.
And it poses all kinds of issues because, in part, our self is tremendously fluid.
Yeah,
our self is fluid. We can contain, of course, multitudes, and
we've become so aware of it, all of us now. The identity is such a big subject now, and it means so many different things in different places. So that for instance, in India, when people talk about identity, they're talking really about religious identity. So
where you belong.
So it's about Hindu-Muslim issues. Yeah. That's what's happening there. In England, when they've been talking about identity, it's because in the whole Brexit nonsense, there's been this fantasy of an imagined England, an imagined Englishness. Back in the good old days when everybody wore straw boaters and moved around on punts,
I remember my mother.
And there were no foreigners.
Whenever the sentence "good old days" came out, my mother would say, "They were old, but were they good?"
Were they good? Well, my friend, the Indian novelist Shashi Tharoor, who's now a politician in India, rather brilliantly went to England recently and spoke about this issue, about the so-called good old days of England. Pointed out that the good old days were based on the mass exploitation of a quarter of the planet.
The empire.
Yes, that as he pointed out, when the British came to India first, it was just about the richest country in the world. It was incredibly wealthy. When the British left India, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Where'd the money go?
Let me think.
Into whose pockets did that money go? Hundreds of years of the rape of India is what financed these beautiful, idyllic summer days with blazers and boaters and glasses of Pimm's and no foreigners.
Do I detect anger?
Just not even, exhaustion, really, more than anger. One of the characters in one of my books once said that the trouble with the English is that their history happened abroad. So they don't know what it is. So there, and here when the conversation about identity arises, it's at this moment primarily either racial identity or gender identity. I mean, those are the hot button issues. So, then here's a novel about people trying to change their identity. So obviously the question of identity is completely central to the book, and so the Museum of Identity was helpful.
I want to talk about one of the sons of Golden, Petya. And
the oldest son.
Yes, the oldest son, and one of his interests, which you describe thus. In his room on an upper floor of the Golden House, he was bathed in blue light and surrounded by computers. And it was as if those electronic brains were his real equals, his truest friends, that the gaming world he entered through those screens was his real world, and that ours was the virtual reality. And I mentioned Twitter and a number of other things before, but what are the implications of this removing oneself or moving towards this world?
I worry about a world in which if you don't photograph your dinner, it doesn't exist. You didn't eat it. And I had my flirtation with Twitter until I came to think that it was actually very well named Twitter. It's this sort of twittering in the back of your head. I just thought, I don't need that noise in my head. And so...
Has it freed some space?
Just stop it. I remember, Jonathan Franzen's always been very anti-social media.
Made him sad.
And I remember there was a point where Jonathan said something in the media, something about how he didn't understand why I was involved because he thought I was more intelligent than that. And I remember thinking, Jonathan, okay, you do what you want to do and leave me alone. But actually, I basically agree with him now, and I think he felt that it was a noise he didn't want in his head, and I've come to the same.
And what about Petya?
Well, Petya, first of all, he's on the spectrum, so he has high-functioning autism moving towards Asperger's. So he has that issue, which is obviously a lot to deal with. And he has trouble functioning in everyday life because he's also agoraphobic. So it's difficult for him to wander around town. He's in a way confined to a small space. I mean, the gardens work for him because they're an enclosed space, so he doesn't feel that's not a problem for him. But going out into the streets is difficult for him, and so he plunges into this other world and turns out to be rather brilliant at it and kind of invents games and apps and makes a fortune. But he's anguished. For me, one of the most important scenes about him in the book is that there's a moment when there's been a kind of, the family's been giving a kind of arrival party to welcome their neighbors to their home, etc. And he gets into a state, and he's suddenly seen on an upper floor windowsill, sitting on the outside of the windowsill, as if he might be thinking about jumping, and crying out to the world, I'm here all by myself. I'm here all by myself. And that sense of solitude and isolation, so on, I think is what he feels. And I then began to think, it's not just him. I think there's that idea of being alone in the world is something I think we all feel. Even if we're lucky enough to be surrounded by loving people and family and friends and so on, there is a kind of existential loneliness. We get...
And perhaps exacerbated by the devices that accompany our lives.
Yeah, because it destroys our ability to talk to each other and be with each other.
To look at each other.
Yeah, look at each other.
I'm always amazed in this city and in most cities now that how often you come too closely bumping into someone.
Yeah. Well, it used to be in this city as in others that if somebody was walking down the street talking to themselves,
we can end that sentence. Yeah. You would imagine that maybe they need some help.
The only difference now between an insane person and everybody else is the possession of a phone. But everybody's walking down the street having their conversation with the world, and really not caring who's listening.
And we're so immersed in these machines and so taken. But I think there's such a difference in between the virtual reality immersion and being immersed in another virtual reality, which is reading.
Yeah, reading's better.
Yeah.
Because the book's over there, and it's words, and you have to do some work to turn those words into images in your mind and to understand them. The thing about these screens is that they do all the work for you. And so it's...
I must say, Salman, it was such a pleasure to go to the special collections with you, because I really felt that there was a form of tactile inebriation. You felt with those...
Tactile inebriation? You mean you get drunk through your fingers?
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, because the things that, you guys don't know, but the things there are in this building...
That you can all see.
Are just, they make you weep.
Such as?
The first folio of William Shakespeare's plays. It's up there. And the first edition, the Sylvia Beach edition of Ulysses, 200 numbered and signed copies. One of them's up there. William Blake, you know, I mean, book by William Blake of which only 10 copies were made in his lifetime. One of them's up there, including the famous picture of Eurozone. You know, Charles Dickens's writing desk. Charlotte Bronte's traveling writing desk. I mean,
what is it about the objects?
The manuscript of The Wasteland with alterations to Eliot's text made by Ezra Pound. Because Ezra Pound, you know, edited The Wasteland, and many people say almost rewrote it. There it is. It's up there. The most amazing thing was not on the once before, when you were kind enough to let me see some of these special collections. I mean, it's actually made you tremble that I was given to hold in my hand the plastic envelope inside which is the handwritten first draft of the Declaration in Jefferson's handwriting with crossings out. I thought, really? And what it shows you is that Jefferson did write almost all of it, but eventually there were some changes made. And Jefferson thought they ruined it. Like all writers succumbing to editing. He thought the final version, it's a mess. But no, the treasures in this building are just breathtaking. And for anyone involved in the world of words, it's a great privilege to be able to see these things.
It's a good segue to move from seeing Jefferson's handwriting to the Joker.
Yeah, if you say so.
And maybe having you read a passage.
All right, yeah, all right, I can read. What do you want? Oh, yeah, all right. Do you want to explain about the Joker?
Yeah, I'd like you to explain a little bit, set up this scene.
All right. Well, the thing about, all I can say is if anybody here, which I presume is most of you, are familiar with a deck of cards, the two most exceptional cards in a deck are the Joker and the Trump. These are the cards that don't behave like the other playing cards. So there isn't a Trump in this novel, but there is a Joker who's running for president and wins. And this is a bit about that. This is when the story steps outside the gardens for a minute. To step outside that enchanted and now tragic cocoon was to discover that America had left reality behind and entered the comic book universe. DC, Suchitra said, was under attack by DC. It was the year of the Joker in Gotham and beyond. The caped crusader was nowhere to be seen. It was not an age of heroes. But his arch rival in the purple frock coat and striped pantaloons was ubiquitous, clearly delighted to have the stage to himself and hogging the limelight with evident delight. He had seen off the Suicide Squad, his feeble competition, but he permitted a few of his inferiors to think of themselves as future members of a Joker administration. The Penguin, the Riddler, Two-Face, and Poison Ivy lined up behind the Joker in packed arenas, swaying like doo-wop backing singers, while their leader spoke of the unrivaled beauty of white skin and red lips to adoring audiences wearing green fright wigs and chanting in unison, "Ha, ha, ha." The origins of the Joker were disputed. The man himself seemed to enjoy allowing contradictory versions to fight for airspace. But on one fact, everyone, passionate supporters and bitter antagonists, was agreed. He was utterly and certifiably insane. What was astonishing, what made this an election year like no other, was that people backed him because he was insane, not in spite of it. What would have disqualified any other candidate made him his followers' hero. Sikh taxi drivers and rodeo cowboys, rabid alt-right blondes and black brain surgeons agreed, "We love his craziness." No milquetoast euphemisms from him. He shoots straight from the hip, says whatever he fucking wants to say, robs whatever bank he's in the mood to rob, kills whoever he feels like killing. He's our guy. The black bat night has flown. It's a new day, and it's going to be a scream. All hail the United States of Joker. USJ, USJ, USJ. Yeah. These are the times we live in. DC taken over by DC. It's a marvel.
It's a a line of H.L. Mencken, which comes to my mind quite often. I'll read it to get it completely right. He says, a demagogue is one who preaches doctrines he knows to be untrue to men he knows to be idiots. And I'm wondering...
You know, I don't know. I mean, I love Mencken, and I like that line. And he has another very brilliant line where he says that Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere might be happy. Which seems to
I like it much more than this
which
one.
seems to me to explain religious fanaticism perfectly. The enemy is happiness.
And humor.
And pleasure.
And humor.
And humor, yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure about that one. Because I don't believe, I would like to be able to believe that everyone who voted Republican in the last election was an idiot. You know, but I don't think so. You know, and I mean, I know a certain amount of them are white supremacists, a certain amount of them are racists, and many of them deeply hated Hillary Clinton, and there's all that. But, you know, this is a very big chunk of the population of the United States. And some of these people were genuinely angry with the system. They felt not listened to by it. They felt excluded from the recovery of the previous 8 years, that they hadn't seen any of the benefits, and they were angry, you know, and
so Mencken's line in some way,
simple.
yeah, it's too simple,
you know?
and in a way it gets us off the hook.
Yeah.
So if we don't get off the hook, Salman,
yeah.
What is it in this bubble that doesn't understand the other bubble?
No, I mean, I'm not sure which side is in the bubble. You know, my view is that there's a lot about that side which believes that the 10 lies a minute that come out of the Oval Office, that maybe they're in the bubble, you know, and we actually are seeing things clearly. But we don't understand each other anymore. We don't talk to each other. You know, this doesn't feel like e pluribus unum. You know, this feels like a very fractured country. And I think we have to deal with that. We can't just pretend it's going to be fine. You know, and I don't mean that means we have to go and kind of suck up to them. I don't have a very long fuse for racism. You know, I don't have much tolerance for people carrying Nazi flags down the streets of Charlottesville. You know, I don't give a fuck about them. But we do need to talk to America in a way that America will listen. Most people are not extremists. They just aren't. You know, I mean, in any country, very few people are extremists. What people are is disenchanted and ceasing to believe what they're told. How do we rekindle a belief in the truth? How do we rekindle a faith in leadership? That's the question. That's the question. You know, the best. I mean, making a political speech, which I'll stop. But
it's not quite a. It's
but the thing that the article I read in the last couple of weeks, which made the most sense to me, was, I can't remember who wrote it, but it said, we have to stop asking what's wrong with him. We have to start asking what's wrong with us. How did we let this happen? And how can we stop it from happening? One of my answers to that is the number that sticks in my head every day is 46.7% of registered voters did not vote. 90 million people did not vote.
Why?
Now, in a country where there's that level of political apathy, you allow a thing like this to happen. You know? And what I'm hoping is that people are, as the kids say, woke. And that next time round, you know, it doesn't even take that many of those people to show up on the day. But right there is the problem. If you have 90 million people who abdicate the decision, then a crazy decision becomes possible. So, anyway, literature.
The Goldens all told stories about themselves, stories in which essential information about origins was either omitted or falsified. I listened to them not as true, but as indications of character. The stories a man told about himself revealed him in ways that the record could not. I thought of these anecdotes as card players, tells the involuntary gestures that give away a hand, the rubbing of the nose when the hand is strong, the fingering of an elaborate when it's weak. The master player watches everyone at the table to discover their tells. This was how I tried to watch and listen to the Golden Men.
He's smart, René.
Yeah, and a physiognomist.
Yeah, and this is a no. This
I
is
love this passage.
It's a genuine. It's a professional card player thing. That there's a wonderful David Mamet movie called House of Games. This is before David Mamet went mad, which he now has, and became a right-wing asshole. But before he was that, when he was a great playwright. House of Games is this film, and one of the things that's in it is this idea that people holding decks of cards, if you know how to watch them, will tell you what they're holding. Just by the way they behave, they'll tell you what they're holding. And if you know how to watch them, you know how to play them. You know, and that's what René is trying to learn. He's trying to learn how to watch people.
And in a way, it's very closely related to what we were talking about before, which is if you pay attention, you might see how you might be fooled.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, you know, the great line from Death of a Salesman, you know, attention must be paid to this man. You know, and I think that the art of the novel is to pay attention. You know, it's to try and see how people actually are, not how they present themselves, to try and see the face behind the mask, you know, to try and understand what's really going on, not what apparently is going on and not what people say is going on. You know, that's the business. It's about paying attention.
You know, I'm always reminded of that wonderful line of Wilde where he said, "It's only superficial people who do not judge by appearance."
You're good. You've got a lot of these today.
You met the Joker.
I've met Trump. Yeah, I met him. I mean, I haven't met him since he decided to run for office, but I met way before. I met him.
But it's an amazing story.
I met him 3 times. Which story do you think is the amazing one?
Well,
I'll tell you all 3.
You can tell exactly. I mean, I'm a man of appetite, so tell all 3.
So the first story is I met him in the year 2000 or maybe 2001 at a Crosby, Stills and Nash concert at Madison Square Garden, not in the big garden, but in the theater at Madison Square Garden. And I was sitting, just by chance, had seats next to him and the disgusting boys and Ivanka in full jailbait mode, you know, and to my amazement, he was on his feet and he knew the words to the songs. I thought, Donald Trump knows the words to Woodstock? You know, that seemed strange, but he did. Anyway, I thought this was just a chance encounter. I think he thought that we had somehow bonded at Crosby, Stills and Nash. So a few years later, I ran into him at the Met, at the Opera. And I saw he's coming towards me with his entourage. And as he approached me, he did this. He took his very small index fingers and he went, "You're the man." And I actually looked behind me, thinking there must be somebody behind me. But apparently I was the man. And I have no idea why I was the man.
But you were.
But I was, and I sort of kind of knew the answer to this, which was, and I said kind of in this sort of voice, I said, "No, Donald, you're the man." and he said, "No, you're the man." Walked off. So that was the second time, which meant I don't know who the hell you are, but I think you're somebody I should recognize. And the third time was about this time of year, because the US Open, the tennis was going on. And I met him at some like charity event, and he asked me if I was interested in tennis, and I said, "Yeah, actually I was, and I sometimes went to the US Open and I liked it." And he very generously offered me his box. But he offered it to me in a way that we're now very familiar with, where he said he had the best box. And now his box was better than all the other boxes. You have to see my box because it knocks the other boxes. And he made, this gesture, which I can't remember which
has become familiar.
Which comedian identified this gesture as pinching an invisible nipple? Once you've seen that, you can't unsee it. So I offer it to you. Anyway, these are my encounters with the leader of the free world.
Let's move on to the fall of the fall of the Roman Empire. I don't want to give too much away. It's a difficult dance tonight.
Yeah.
But here it goes. It's very late in the book, but I think it will be.
Right.
I think we'll be safe. Civilization itself seemed to be burning in the fire. My hopes, the hopes of women, our hopes for our planet and for peace. I thought of all those thinkers burned at the stake, all those who stood up against the forces and orthodoxies of their time, and I felt myself and my whole disenfranchised kind bound now by strong chains and engulfed by the awful blaze. The West itself on fire, Rome burning, the barbarians not at the gates but within, our own barbarians nurtured by ourselves, coddled and glorified by ourselves, enabled by ourselves, as much our own as our children, rising like savage children to burn the world that made them, claiming to save it, even as they set it ablaze. It was the fire of our doom. It would take us half a century or more to rebuild what it destroyed.
One of the great things, there's a great poem by Cavafy called "Waiting for the Barbarians." And it's about Rome waiting for the barbarians. And what the poem realizes is that you already are the barbarians you're waiting for. And that nobody's going to come, they're already here. And I thought about that poem when I was writing that passage, because I felt that we're exactly in that place where the barbarians are here, and they're us. They're us. If you forget what civilization is, you're a barbarian. And we're in danger of doing that, and some of us have done it. Civilization, very, very hard thing to build, because it's not entirely in accord with human nature. Human nature can be selfish and crude.
Sounds like somebody.
Civilization, which requires us to be selfless and as interested in the benefit of others as of ourselves, so on. That's an incredible construction. It's an incredible construction, which has taken centuries to build and is very easily broken. And I think we're in the process of, smashing it.
It's interesting when you said not natural. It brings to mind something I haven't thought of for a long time, which is how Schopenhauer spoke about good manners. And that we develop good manners because essentially we are porcupines to each other. So we need to become polished.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. How do porcupines make love? Very carefully. But it's exactly that. And that's, to go back to what you were saying about social media, I mean, one of the things that I came to dislike about Twitter is how bad-mannered it is. Is that how this whole civilization is an artifice. It's a kind of trick we play on ourselves to prevent us from killing each other. But it's when that slips away, and we start being rude and discourteous and dismissive and selfish, and etc. Then
rude as in also rough.
Yeah. Then we're doing something dangerous to ourselves, and I worry about it.
It's interesting you should also have mentioned Cavafy, because I think either you said it to me or I read it that while writing this book, poetry was very much part of your daily...
Well, I do, yeah, I do. I mean, the great thing about poetry is that it pays very serious attention to language, and I think if you're writing a big thing which is, like 400 pages long, it's easy sometimes to slip in your attention, and reading a bit of poetry reminds you, to pay attention, and it means it takes longer to write, but that's all right,
If civilization is so fragile and vulnerable and threatened, where does the hope lie? And in some way also, is this novel veering towards hopelessness?
No, because it ends in a moment of real hope, I think. And what it suggests is that there is the best of us, which is able to overcome the worst of us. And the question is how to do that. How is it that the thing in us which you could broadly express as love might be able to be more powerful than hate? And I believe it can be. And I think the way the novel ends, which I won't say, but it ends in a moment of love and forgiveness. And it was a way for me to say that there is this in human nature too. We are capable of this too. We are not doomed to be our worst selves. We can also be our best selves. And the question is how to move from one to the other. It's funny, this book. I just want to say that.
How do you mean it's funny?
It's funny, it makes people laugh. And I mean, what we're saying is very serious and dark and so on, but
I remember we once spoke about humor in your work.
Yeah, I mean,
which I think so often...
people miss. Well, people fail to mention.
Because they don't read.
People fail to mention. I think, as a reader, I like books that have humor in them, and I...
Such as?
Well, such as all the books I like, but I get into...
Good answer, by the way.
I get into terrible trouble because I remember years ago, I did it just now in somewhere like New York Magazine, where they asked me which was a famous classic that I'd sort of failed to finish. And I said Middlemarch. And I got terribly beaten up for it. How can you say that about the greatest novel ever written in the English language? And I said, well, I've tried, and it's really, really long, and it doesn't have I mean, George Eliot, genius writer, but no humor at all. No humor at all. There's not a cracking of a smile in the 2,000 pages of Middlemarch. You know, maybe 3,000.
4,000.
And so I understand that this is my problem, not George Eliot's. And her reputation will survive my failing to read her. You know? And it should. I acknowledge all that. But, you know, there is a problem when people don't have a sense of humor for me. And a real sense of humor it draws me in. It's one of the reasons why one of the great writers that I shared a love of with Christopher Hitchens was P.G. Wodehouse. And I mean, nobody could ever compete with Christopher in terms of memory, but we both had, you know, we were able to quote passages, but Christopher could quote very long passages, verbatim, and would correct you when you said something. So it's not that, it's this. We both agreed that, for example, in the greatest novel of P.G. Wodehouse, The Code of the Worcesters, there's a character called Sir Roderick Spode. Sir Roderick Spode is based on the British fascist leader Oswald Mosley. Oswald Mosley's group was called the Black Shirts. Roderick Spode's group is called the Black Shorts. And they walk around wearing black shorts, you know. And there's a moment at which Bertie Wooster makes a speech which Christopher and I agreed was probably the greatest anti-Nazi speech in English literature. He said, "Look here, Spode, you probably think you're very special, swanking about in footer bags and having people shout, 'Heil Spode.' That is where you make your error," etc. I mean, it's a wonderful speech, and never breaks the comic mode. You know, never becomes didactic, but you know, the point is well made.
Well, Hitchens and you have that in common too, which is a real appreciation of learning things by heart.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one of the, you know, in my generation at school, we were still made to memorize poetry. Now this is considered to be fantastically oppressive and unfashionable, you know. But I'm grateful for it.
Which poem do you hold on to?
I can do the whole of The Walrus and the Carpenter.
Do a bit of it.
The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all its might, did its very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. It's very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sand was dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no clouds were in the sky. There were no birds were flying overhead. There were no birds to fly. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If only this was cleared away, they said. Now, wouldn't it be grand if 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year? Do you suppose, the Walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the Carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. Oh, oysters, come and walk with us, the Walrus did beseech. A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each. Then there's a verse where I always forget 2 lines, but it's about the eldest oyster saying, no, thank you. And the eldest oyster shook his head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their hair was brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat, and this was odd, because, you know, they hadn't any feet. And 4 more oysters hurried up, and yet another 4, and thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothing waves and scrambling to the shore. The Walrus and the Carpenter walked on a mile or so. Then they rested by a rock, conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. The time has come, the Walrus said, to speak of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, of why the sea is boiling hot and whether pigs have wings. But wait a bit, the oysters cried, before we have our chat. For some of us are out of breath and all of us are fat. No hurry, said the Carpenter. They thanked him much for that. A loaf of bread, the walrus said, is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very nice indeed. Now, if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed. But not on us, the oysters cried, turning a little blue. After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do. The night is fine, the walrus said. Do you admire the view? It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice. The carpenter said nothing but, cut us another slice. I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice. Seems a shame, the walrus said, to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick. The carpenter said nothing but, the butter spread too thick. I weep for you, the walrus said. I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears, he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. Well, oysters dear, the walrus said, we've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again? But answer came there none. And this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one.
Salman Rushdie. Do you want to read that last passage?
All right. What do you want me to read?
Page 40.
Page 40? Oh, yeah, all right. I'm going to read. This is not by Lewis Carroll.
I figured we might finish with you.
Yeah, me. Lewis Carroll and I, I'm very proud to say, went to the same school, which I didn't like at all, rugby school in England. But one of the things I did like was when I went into Rugby Chapel, which I had to do compulsorily several times a week, there was a marble plaque up to the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland with marble cutout silhouettes of the Tenniel drawings of his characters. And I thought, well, you know, I was at school with him.
And you just saw upstairs.
Just saw upstairs one of the original, maybe the original drawing of the walrus of the carpenter.
You did.
It's up there. It's what made me think of it. All right, so this is, in a novel that's not very fabulous, this is a kind of fabulous paragraph. There was once a wicked king who made his 3 sons leave their home and then kept them bottled up in a house of gold, sealing the windows with golden shutters and blocking the doors with stacks of American ingots and sacks of Spanish doubloons and racks of French louis d'or and buckets of Venetian ducats. But in the end, the children turned themselves into birds resembling feathered snakes and flew up the chimney and were free. Once they were out in the open air, however, they found they could no longer fly and tumbled painfully into the street to lie wounded and bewildered in the gutter. A crowd gathered, uncertain whether to worship or fear the fallen snake birds until someone threw the first stone. After that, the hail of stones quickly killed all 3 of the changelings, and the king, alone in the golden house, saw all his gold in all his pockets, all his stacks, all his sacks, all his buckets begin to glow more and more brightly until it caught fire and burned. The disloyalty of my children has killed me, he said, as the flames rose high all around him. But that is not the only version of the story. In another, the sons did not escape, but died with the king in the blaze. In a third variation, they murdered one another. In a fourth, they killed their father, simultaneously becoming both parricides and regicides. It is even possible that the king was not entirely wicked, or had some noble qualities as well as many appalling ones. In our age of bitterly contested realities, it is not easy to agree upon what is actually happening or has happened, on what is the case, let alone upon the moral or the meaning of this or any other tale.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thank you. All right.